This is one of those films that kind of annoys me, because while it is good, I saw a lot more potential in it to be really outstanding. The setup is definitely one of the most creative Pixar have come up with. Monsters come into children's rooms at night to scare them, not because they are mindless, heartless beasts with no real sense of what they are doing, but because it's their job. Monsters are really no different than people. They live in houses, talk, and work jobs the same as us. They just somehow have found a way to access the human world through wardrobe doors. Then we have the two main protagonists, Sulley, the top scarer at the factory, and his best friend Mike. I never really liked the way these two were introduced. Mike comes across more like Sulley's coach than his friend. He keeps talking to him about breaking the scare record, almost like scaring kids is some kind of a sport. In fact, that does seem to be the only thing going on in Mike and Sulley's life when the film begins. They're trying to break the scare record, there's a bit of an energy crisis, and Mike has a girlfriend. That's it really, there are no real major issues or dilemmas set up in the early stages. The more interesting character is the antagonist, Randall. He is frustrated by the fact Sulley is a better scarer than him and is trying to find a way to become more productive. It is revealed later in the film that with the help of the head of the company, Waternoose, he plans to kidnap kids and suck the screams out of them. A great example of how there are those that will do anything to keep their business alive. It's established early on that Waternoose takes great value in Sulley as his top scarer, and yet he is still willing to banish him to the human world for the sake of this plan. I do have to say though, I don't really know why he spreads this myth around that humans are deadly if a monster touches them. I mean, wouldn't that make it much more difficult for him to find monsters willing to work for him? Of course, the main thing people remember about this film is Boo, or more precisely, the relationship between her and Sulley. It's interesting how Sulley never really has any real problem with her. He's just scared of her at first because he thinks she's dangerous. Fairly soon after meeting her, Sulley comes to have fatherly-like feelings towards her. Mike was always happy just to dispose of her in the easiest and quickest way possible, but Sulley was always insistent that they get her home safely. Then later, when he unintentionally scares her in a demonstration, he realizes that there actually is something wrong with scaring kids, even if it is for a good reason. Even if the kids are deadly to monsters, that may not necessarily be their fault, so they don't really deserve this. This is definitely a much more interesting relationship than the one between Mike and Sulley. Which brings me on to the one major thing I didn't like about this film, the relationship between Sulley and Mike. Like I said, considering they live and work together, they don't really seem like they're very close. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they dislike each other. It just doesn't seem like they really care for one another in the same way that, say, Woody and Buzz did. Mike acts more like Sulley's coach, and Sulley acts more like Mike's boss most of the time. The only real moment where they actually act like friends is when Sulley goes to file Mike's papers for him, without him even having to ask. As a result, that scene in the cave where they fall out seemed a bit forced to me. What is Mike even mad at Sulley for? They were banished because they found out about Randall's plan. But he's the one that told Waternoose about it. He's the one that told him about the kid. And then when they get back into the human world, they make up pretty quickly. Although the scene where Mike apologises while Randall is fighting Sulley was pretty funny. Okay, I've said enough negative things about this film. Let's look at some of the good things. The chase scene in the warehouse with the doors is one of the most creative chase scenes I've ever seen. I don't think you will ever see another film where a character survives a fall by going through a door. While I don't think she added very much to the story, I love the design of Mike's girlfriend with her Medusa-style hair. I love the part where her snakes get worried when she mentions she might get it cut. Also a nice opening credit sequence, if you can even call it that when it's just the studios and the movie title. There is also a nice ending with Laugh now being used to power the city instead of Scream, which means of course the kids are no longer suffering. I do kind of feel like the ending, with Roz being an undercover agent and the factory being shut down, is a little unnecessarily complicated though. By the way, maybe I'm missing something here, but why do they shut the factory down right after the bad guys are taken away? I get that there was an energy crisis, but it seems almost like they're shutting the factory down because the evil plan has failed. Was Randall's plan with sucking the screams out of the kids the only thing keeping the factory alive or something? Another minor thing I didn't like were the outtakes during the end credits. Now don't get me wrong, I thought the outtakes in A Bug's Life were really creative, and they had me falling out of my chair with laughter in Toy Story 2. But by the time they got to this film, I kind of felt like the novelty had worn off. I also didn't like the musical they did. Thankfully though, this was the last of the Pixar films to have outtakes. So overall, Monsters Inc. had a lot of potential, with some great setups and a lot of creative ideas. And there are a lot of things in it that do work. I like Sulley's relationship with Boo, the chase scene with the doors is great, and the ending was very satisfying. As movies go, it is good. But for Pixar, I just don't feel like it pushes the boundaries of what you can do with animation in the way that a lot of their films do. It really just felt like a standard buddy comedy / chase flick, which isn't helped by the fact that I never really feel like Mike and Sulley were best friends. Monsters, Inc. gets a 7 out of 10.